We are excited to welcome our viewers to today's Global Innovation Through Science and Technology, also known as GIST TechConnect conversation from the lab to market. Before we get into the introduction, let's start with the question that we've received earlier, which focuses on the lab aspect. Nikhil from India asks, what are the best ways to find cheaper facilities to convert my ideas into a product? Jill or Mike? Please.
Well, I think the question is quite broad. And when I think it depends what kind of product you're trying to make. Is it a toy for children? Or is it a manufacturing piece? And I think a prototype needs to be made. And once the prototype is made, then you can think about scaling it up and finding a cheaper facility, but in whatever market that you're trying to address. And I think the cheapest way to get a prototype, if you can, for whatever problem you're trying to address, make it yourself. Even if it starts by a drawing, get other people involved, and just take it further from that point of view.
Great. Mike, would you like to add?
To elaborate a little bit on that, I think it depends strongly on what particular kind of product you're building. Is it a biomedical invention? Is it a semiconductor invention? Is it a hardware invention? So as Jill mentioned, rapid prototyping is really important. If you can stay in your own garage or somewhere else where you don't have to pay a lot of overhead, use all your capital for your invention as opposed to shelling it out for rent in an expensive space that may not be the right thing for you to do right now.
And if I can add something else, he mentioned rapid prototyping. And I can tell by the question, because it's so broad, there's so many questions potential entrepreneurs have. And my recommendation really is to fail fast and fail cheap. And what I mean by that, just really go ahead and start and try. You learn from that. And I think especially scientists, we don't look at non-results as failures. So just make that prototype. The learning that you obtain on that path is really valuable.
Wonderful answers. Before we move into some more questions and introduce ourselves, please start sending questions now in the chat space next to the video or using the Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag at GIST TechConnect when tweeting about the event today. I'm Ovidiu Bujorean, the lead for the GIST initiative at CRDF Global. CRDF is very proud to partner with the State Department on this initiative, which empowers youth from around the world to turn their ideas into viable ventures that will catalyze economic growth. Today we have a very knowledgeable and dynamic panel with us to answer some of your burning questions. Our panel will share their thoughts on three key subjects: the difference in cultures from academia to business, the pros and cons of patenting and the selection of the appropriate market for your goods. So I would like to take a moment to introduce our program and the panel. CRDF Global as an organization has been proudly supporting the young entrepreneurs, technology and science entrepreneurs in more than 60 countries for more than 50 years. Our TechConnect activities have been seen by more than 8,000 viewers in more than 33 countries. This level of outreach is possible because of the partnerships between the US State Department, CRDF Global, and many local partners that are listed on our website. And now, back to introductions. We have with us Dr. Michael Koeris and Dr. Jill Becker in the studio. Dr. Michael Koeris is the co-founder and CEO of Sample6 Technologies, a synthetic biology startup aiming at improving the health and safety of global consumers. Sample6 is developing integrated systems that can quickly and easily detect harmful and unwanted bacteria in food, shifting food safety from reaction to prevention. Dr. Jill Becker is a serial entrepreneur with multiple academic publications, US patents, and entrepreneurship awards to her name. Currently, she's the founder and CXO of 02139 Inc. I remember the zip code from Cambridge, a strategy consulting firm focused on helping clients understand the cusp of new technologies and new ways to deliver growth effectively. We are now moving. Thank you very much for joining us. Very happy to have you with us.
Pleasure.
We are moving now to live questions from our audience. Van Cam wants to know, what advice would you give to those who are not particularly skilled in commercialization? Do they have to pay a professional to get the job done? Yes.
I think, again, it depends on what you need, and I don't think you need to pay a professional right from the get-go. I bootstrapped a capital equipment company from my home, and I'm a trained chemist. I have a PhD in chemistry. I was not trained as an engineer, but I knew how to put it on paper, and then I outsourced the prototype, and it was enough to get the job done and start manufacturing them. So I think as long as you can describe your vision by whatever means necessary to somebody else, then you don't need a professional. You will need help along the way. A lot of these companies that end up being successful and growing, it's not just one person, it's a team of great people. So see, while you're trying to push the idea that you have, if you can partner up with good people, people that you can work with, people that round out the team that you need. And remember, in a startup, the first 6 hires are the most important and will really determine the success of your startup.
This is a connection to one of our prior Tech Connects where Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari Games, mentioned that actually the initial hires and the founders team is like the certain blueprint that will tend to replicate later on in the life of the company. So if you get the initial blueprint really well in terms of the types of people and the complementarity of their skills, this is very important for whatever is happening after. And I'm sure we'll get to talk a little bit about this later as well. We have a question from Tomek in Poland. What should be the top 3 things that I should complete before I move from lab to market? Michael?
Thank you. I think it depends a little bit on which region in the world you're in, but in general, I think you should have a commercial entity that you can use to commercialize your invention within, because what you're ultimately trying to do is to create value for yourself, for your partners, and produce a product that hopefully has a positive impact on society. So do that such that you have the appropriate commercial shell for it, and then make sure that you really have your own personal life in order to go forth and take this undertake this journey, because it is going to be stressful, it's going to be long, and it's going to be hard, and you should be clear that with everyone you work with and with everyone that you live with, that's really what you're going to do for the next couple of years.
Thank you, Michael. Happy to see questions coming from our audience. We are moving from Poland to Côte d'Ivoire. Fabrice asks, what are the major steps to bringing a scientific discovery to the market? Is it the same? Are these the same steps in every country? Dr. John Becker.
Again, it depends on which scientific discovery and how you want to proceed. I, for example, am a chemist, but I ended up focusing in on a thin film technology. And instead of selling the technology, I created a piece of equipment, small, medium, and large, that I sold to scientists and industry worldwide. And that's how I brought my scientific discovery of my thesis to the market. And I actually had a lab to fab strategy. So it really depends on what it is. Are you selling a drug? Are you selling a piece of equipment? It depends. And the strategies within different regions, not so specific, I think, to countries, can, of course, be different.
I think to add on this, Jill makes a very good point, and I think I want to try to put some systematizing thoughts around it. The first thing you should always do with any scientific experiment, with any scientific discovery, is repeat it. Does it work once? Does it work twice? And then once you have that particular proof of concept and you're confident that it works, see if it scales. So go from proof of concept to scale, which is what Jill did as well, from the lab to the fab.
And if I just may, this question makes me think of the previous question as well. It's really important that you incorporate, for your own protection, that you have the intellectual property on this discovery, whatever it is, or if you license it, because there's a potential that it might get ripped off. And then the third thing is you have to get the certifications for that product, whether it's CE marking or FDA approval or whatever the FDA in your country is. Those are sort of non-sciencey things, but those are the standard things you'll need to do for your product, regardless in what market it's in.
One of the things I saw in one of the research papers that we have in under your viewing screen, in academia, one of the key incentives is actually publishing papers. So if you make the mistake of actually sharing your discovery or a specific competitive advantage with the audience before you actually patent your product that you want to use to go to market, I think it may be a key mistake. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so you have to be very cognizant of the intellectual property laws, not only of your own country, but because intellectual property law is usually globally viewed of what it actually also is in other major markets like the US, Europe, and Japan. And generally speaking, patent first, publish later. They can be closely linked, but you should always patent it first. Also, careful about who you talk to about your invention, what particular things you disclose, even casually. Depending on which jurisdiction you live in, those things can be really difficult to track back with, and they may actually reduce the value of your invention.
Yes, it's very important that you patent. My thesis advisor was excellent at this. The second there was a scientific discovery, we do a patent application, which is much, much, much cheaper than a full patent. And that would allow us to publish and to talk to other people about it as we further the idea. When you do a patent, be sure you don't make a blueprint of how your product is made, which is a mistake I personally have made. But, you know, you live and you grow and you learn. And the other thing is, in a patent, it's important that this idea is novel and innovative. But in innovation, it has to be novel and add value to the market that you're trying to address, which means it doesn't have to be all that novel in terms of that it's never been done before. The most important part in innovation is that it adds value. So does your invention add value? Maybe you're not rediscovering the wheel from the ground up, but you have a better wheel to provide to a certain market.
Great. And there are a few tools that I know that our entrepreneurs can use. I remember, I think Google has Google Patents search capabilities, and also one of my former professors at MIT, Sloan, Joe Hadzima, has his own company, IP Vision, where companies or entrepreneurs can use his capabilities to look through the patents and also relationships between certain patents and also companies, because basically you have to see what else is there before you even start patenting your own capabilities. Let's move to more questions from our audience. In your experience, which came first, the science or the business idea? In other words, did basic research led to ideas in commercialization, or do you think of a problem and then conduct applied research to find a solution? I think this is a very substantive question. In your own experience, how did it happen?
Well, for me, I can say that certainly the science came first. Like Jill, I did my PhD in bioengineering, and we discovered some cool science and some cool potential applications. So science came first. Essentially, we developed a hammer, and then we were looking for the nails that we could pound in with that hammer. Having said that, I actually very strongly feel that it does work both ways. And going forward in the future, what I may do is maybe identify a nail that is very valuable or interesting, and then see which hammer I can find to actually attack that nail.
For me, I was a little girl in Germany. I was maybe 6 years old, and I was not allowed to drink Coca-Cola, but that's everything that I've ever really wanted to do. So I used to actually try to make Coca-Cola in my kitchen. So it's not so surprising that I became a chemist. And as I grew through the ranks of academia, I really always wanted to marry science and business. So I've always had sort of a business aspect in the science that I do. So when I fell in love with a certain technology and I really thought it would revolutionize many markets, for me to create an enabling tool that anyone, not just scientists, can use this technology to further their products and devices and widgets, it became very clear. So I'm not sure if science or business came first. For me, they're one and the same. If you look at all the tech companies out there, they rely heavily on science.
Great. Before we move to more live questions, last week it was announced that Dr. Sanjita Bhatia, biomedical engineer and professor at MIT, received the 500,000 Lemelson MIT Prize Award for her work in designing and commercializing miniaturized technologies that seek to improve human health. In partnership with her students and postdoctoral associates, she pursued all available paths to commercialization, from licensing to existing companies, to co-founding startups and supporting student-led startups and pursuing industrial collaboration. As a result, she has been involved and launching 10 companies and more than 70 products. So what separates scientists like Dr. Bhatia from others who do not enter the marketplace? And I think Dr. Jill Becker even met with her last week, coincidentally. So would you like to comment on that?
Well, yes, Dr. Bhatia was the Woman in Science, which is a yearly award the Museum of Science in Boston gives out. So I had the pleasure of seeing a lunchtime talk on last Monday, or this Monday. Yesterday.
It was on the 15th.
It was on the 15th, so yesterday. And I think what separates a scientist like that is really, it's more an attitude. It's an attitude that the research that you're doing is valid and valuable enough to bring to market. And you can really see that when somebody creates companies over and over and over again. Not every company is going to be a success, but I think it's great for her to try and for her to support other students. And there's a great ecosystem that can be built, too, amongst areas. I mean, I'm lucky that I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with Harvard and MIT, and the ecosystem there is very, very rife. Now, I understand if you don't live in such an area, that doesn't mean you can't create an ecosystem like that. Ideas come from human beings. All human beings, in my opinion, are scientists. A scientist is just a human being trying to understand how the world works. And if you find a way that you think you can make something better, bring it to market. There's nothing stopping you.
If I can expand on what Jill said, the point about scientists and professors in academia or serial entrepreneurs like Jill, there is an attitude that is different from many other academics that sometimes may think that, okay, I've published my research, now somebody else can go and commercialize it, as opposed to saying, I have discovered this interesting thing and I'm going to take it on myself or work with my colleagues to commercialize it. So the obligation that they take on themselves is to actually make sure that that science gets at least a good shot to be applied in the market and have a positive impact. So I think it's very valuable to have that particular kind of insight and attitude, and I would love to see more of that all over the world.
And I think there are two dimensions. One is the entrepreneur himself or herself, and second is the support you can get from the university and the other key players in the ecosystem. But as an entrepreneur, you have to go, reach out and find the sources of support that will help you advance. But you have the initiative and you move the things forward. We are moving to more questions from the audience. Taha in Pakistan asks on Twitter, what is the best way to approach an investor and how do you find one? And with this subject also, what sources of funding you see existing for entrepreneurs like yourselves and also like the entrepreneurs and scientists in our audience? Where do you actually go for capital? Michael?
So I can't speak for all these countries that I've never had the pleasure of visiting or understanding what the investment scene looks like. But generally speaking, investors can fall into three categories, I believe. It is your network, your personal friends, your family, maybe if you're fortunate enough to have capital available in your family. Then there are professional investors that have money from someone else and want to invest it in you in order to make more money for their investors. So they actually act as middlemen to some degree and as centralizers of capital. And then thirdly, whatever industry you are in or whatever industry you think you're going to be entering, there's going to be large established players, and most of them actually have a dedicated interest in talking to startups, maybe investing, maybe helping you in another way. So these three tiers, very close to you, the family, the professional investors, the money managers, banks and others, and then strategic investors like, for example, Intel in the capital generating business.
Great.
And
Yes.
if I may, the idea of bootstrapping a company is also always available to you. Money is, of course, maybe the number one limiting factor, but sometimes you can just start to sell. And then for me, how did I start a capital equipment company for my house? I started to sell, and I asked for 50% down. And that money allowed me to build enough tools to sell to more customers, and it took off like that.
And I think this is a great point you're making, Dr. Becker, because usually the investors will also want to see early signs of market validation. So the moment you can show a number of customers that are interested, that's a good market validation that will also persuade the future investors.
And work on your pitch. And by pitch, I mean you have to tell someone what is the value add and to whom is this valuable within less than 60 seconds.
And just to close out the question, how do you approach investors? You just introduce yourself. It is investors, it's the job of an investor usually to source interesting ideas, so you're doing part of their job for them. So don't be shy and just go call them up, email them. They're more likely than not willing to meet with you.
And I think what resonates really with investors is the passion that comes from you. They're going to believe in your idea if you can really project that you believe in it, because they're not going to understand every single technology or every single scientific discovery out there. So they're going to believe you, the person, and the passion that you have for this idea.
Wonderful insights. Thank you very much. David Lakshi from Russia asks, where can the young startups participate so interested people learn about them? So what sort of visibility opportunities? In other words, how can young startups put themselves out there and make themselves known?
Well, it's a great question, and specifically in this particular case, in Russia, I do know of an initiative. It is the MIT Skolkovo initiative that invites startups from all around Russia to be exposed to, at least in Boston, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the venture capital ecosystem. So for anybody that is interested in getting more exposure, look for those centralized hubs, like universities usually, particular institutes maybe of entrepreneurship or not. They usually exist at every larger university. And see if they have collaborations with other partner universities all over the world. Because what you want to get is as many eyes looking at your particular invention or idea or technology as possible, such that they can give you feedback. That's all you need. You need a lot of feedback in order to make sure that this is really the right thing to do right now.
And Mr. Jose Estabil, the program manager for the MIT Skolkovo program, I know that he has been organizing visits of Russian entrepreneurs to US for the purpose of actually introducing them to the likes of Mass Challenge and other accelerators that actually are hubs of also investors and entrepreneurs and support systems. We're moving to a question from Leonardo Nunes Ricucci from Chile. How do you negotiate IP-related issues when working as a joint venture with the bigger company?
That's a really interesting one, and that's a hard question, and I'm not sure, no one answer will fit this, but I think the shortest possible answer is you got to be really careful. You got to be really careful, and I speak from my own personal experience. Large companies are very good at protecting their own IP, and in particular ways, if they are able to integrate their IP with your IP, all of a sudden it is really hard to disentangle that, and then you cannot actually go and bring your invention to market without their IP. So you're linked to them, and you may not want to be linked to them at this particular point. So be careful. That does not mean don't do it. There are many, many benefits of working with a large company, but be really careful.
If I just can add to that, it's very difficult to do joint IP or joint development agreements, especially with a large company. It's almost best to be able to separate it out, that this is yours and this is theirs. And you also have to think about, as time moves on and this IP turns into more IP, who does this belong to? So you could think of, if it is separate, that you have cross-licensing and exclusivity perhaps with this larger company. I wish you all the best. Those are some of the toughest things to do in the business world.
Great question and great answers. Thank you. Slava Korobeinikov from Uzbekistan. What do you think about bootstrapping versus going through an incubator or an accelerator for a tech ed startup?
Well, I think that question's addressed to me because I've bootstrapped. And in terms of incubator, accelerator, I think of that more as a hub where other startups are there. One of the things when I start my companies, it's kind of lonely. You know, I start them from my house, I'm by myself. I could work or I could watch TV if I wanted to, or read the newspaper. And I think, so some people cannot work from home, and that's why it's very good when they go to these areas, these office areas that are popping up, I think, all over the world, and check with your government if they have something like this locally, where you go to work and you get really inspired by all these other people that are trying to further their startups and their ideas. So it depends a little bit on how you work. I'm a mom, I have 2 young kids. And I really just wanted to also be at home with them while I did my companies. So
I think there's another angle on this as well, because some accelerators and incubators actually take a portion of your equity, your stocks, and take a position in your company in return for some services they provide, for some space maybe, and maybe for some initial investment. And you got to be really sure that that is the right path to go down on, because early on, taking money can be very dilutive to you. You haven't really proved out anything. You haven't really gotten market traction. So be careful about who you go in with on an incubator side. Having said that, if the network is really great, if you get exposure to many, many great guys and gals and potential investors, maybe that is a good way to go, but it depends.
Great, and I think also to build on both of your points, I think it's good to assess the different options and see what do you get, because there are so many opportunities in some countries for accelerators, and each one will have a different value proposition. So it's very good to assess also between them which one will best fit your area. Before we move on to more of your wonderful questions, our partner in Bangladesh, Startup Dhaka, sent us a picture via Twitter. Hello, Startup Dhaka. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I want to encourage the other viewing sites to continue to send us pictures. It's a great way to see the global entrepreneurial community in different parts of the world connected to our event TechConnect and to your insights. Another online question: what is your advice to entrepreneurs for bridging the gap and crossing what's termed the Valley of Death? Valley of Death, the stage between lab research and the commercial product launch?
There's a couple of different ways of thinking about this. It's a popular phrase, but having gone through several different stages of taking what was on the bench, the initial invention during my PhD and my buddy's PhD, and then going, improving it and building a first product and then building a second product and trying to scale, it occurred to me that there's actually many different valleys, one after another. So what you're faced with is just overcoming these hurdles, and you have to actually be very clear that your only job is to overcome that first hurdle and then live to fight another day, essentially. So focus on what's immediately in front of you. Don't totally forget what the ultimate goal is, but focus on that and then hop over that and get the next one. And I want to tell you, it's going to be a long journey, but it's the coolest thing I've ever done.
I also want to recommend, there's a very good book from Jeffrey Moore, which is called Crossing the Chasm, that talks exactly about the Valley of Death and actually taking entrepreneurs from one stage of actually working with early adopters to the fast followers and the other key categories of customers. And he talks exactly what you mentioned about the different death valleys, because it's not just one, there are multiple at the different stages. So it's important to see the types of customers and what sort of differences there are between the different stages. Kezang from Bhutan, hi Kezang, asks, how much does an education system in a country enable or disable innovation and entrepreneurship? And I think to build on that, expanding on the role of universities and the other key players in the education component. From your perspective, how helpful were universities and a good education system? Do you have any advice, Dr. Becker?
Well, I bootstrap it for a variety of reasons. In my department at the time, I mean, I defended my thesis in 2002, and I think things are different today. it was more, I was expected to go into academia or into industry, and I chose to do this. I'm now a mentor sort of in that ecosystem that I live in, and the universities have a much different attitude. And I think it's also in their best interest for innovation and entrepreneurship, because they spend a lot of money on their faculty, on their students who produce intellectual property. So that they're sitting on, in my opinion, millions and millions of dollars that are just kind of not cashed in or out, however you want to put it, unless you start to license this technology out. And what better way to do it than to the inventors, whether the postdocs or grad students or faculty members themselves. So I actually think that all universities in the world can be their own startup hubs. And even if they outsource it to another entity that lives perhaps in the city or right next to it, but I think it's very important, and they could be real big powerhouses.
Expanding on what Jill said, I think actually it's really important to realize that most entrepreneurs, they went to school somewhere. So what was really transformative for myself was seeing, right, essentially as somebody comes back to the university to help mentor the next generation of entrepreneurs, that yes, it is possible. Yes, it's going to be hard work, but you can absolutely do it, and you should do it. So that there is an opportunity and that you should take that path. That's what actually has been transformative for myself, as opposed to going down the traditional path of becoming either a professor or working in industry. So striking out on your own is, to some degrees, a special privilege that we get to view in Boston and in Cambridge, specifically around biomedicine. But it is not unique. There's no monopoly on innovation and entrepreneurship at all means.
Especially now with the MOOC classes and a lot of opportunities to get classes online right now. I would like also to add that one of the papers we have, you can actually click and download, is called a Lab to Market Roadmap for Early Stage Entrepreneurship. Describes also more about the role of universities on the education in actually teaching entrepreneurs and scientists specific things on technology validation, market validation, and company formation, because a lot of the scientists know very well the technical knowledge on the specific innovation, but the aspects related to more of a company formation or market validation are not very familiar. Sumik Aswad from Panacea in Bangladesh, one of the GIST entrepreneurs, asks Dr. Jill Becker, how do you balance being a student and running a business? What would you advise me to do?
Well, I kind of look at everyone's life as you're always a lifelong learner. So in a sense, you're always a student. If your business starts to take off, well, look at some of the richest men in the world. They dropped out of college in order to pursue their careers. You can think of Dell, Microsoft. You can just try your best. And sometimes it's actually nice, I think, if you just, for certain hours a day, focus on being a student and just on being a student, and then you turn that off almost like a light switch and focus on running your business. It's almost like taking a break one from the other. I do this when it comes to business and being a parent. And I find it's actually very, very helpful. There's days where I multitask and I try to do both, but that, for me, upsets me a little bit more on the inside. So I like to have these light switches, and perhaps that will work for you. And just go ahead and graduate really quick.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Becker. Sadia from Pakistan asks us, how can a young entrepreneur manage financing for a patent without sharing the idea with potential sponsors? Back to the IP question.
It's a great question as well, and a really relevant one, because you may have the ideas before you have the capital to finance a full-blown patent application. But as Jill mentioned, filing provisional patent applications, getting the initial claims registered somewhere can be done cheaply. And at least in some of the jurisdictions that exist, there may be free resources and or cheap resources that you could use either online or, and this is something that we have used a lot, is you can ask patent attorneys to do some work up front or for free, pro bono as it is called, and they may actually help you.
Wonderful. Question from our partner in Indonesia, Ciputra University. When do you think would be the right time for a venture to start researching new products and directions?
I think if you want some income for tomorrow, you always have to think about innovation today. So, I mean, if you have a great product, but its life cycle is 5 years, no one's going to buy it after 5 years, and you know that, you better have other income streams for your company. So I think you need to think about innovation all the time.
Great. Ash from Sri Lanka asks, how do you persuade an investor or company to pick up a completely new product or invention that does not currently exist in the market? I work with a company trying to introduce nanotechnology in Sri Lanka.
It's hard, but as Jill mentioned, you have to convince the investor of the added value that you bring into the market. Ultimately, technology is a tool to enable us as humans and society to do something with it better, cheaper, faster, or do something new. And I think that value has got to be communicated appropriately to your investors.
We have an example in the GIST network. We have Dr. Khairul from Malaysia with MyDerm that actually took an innovation from the university setting, and he was able to raise, I think, about 5 million in funding from the Malaysian Technology Development Corporation. Some of the countries that we are working with, they have government-backed venture funds that will actually support locally developed innovations that address market needs locally. So I encourage you to connect with our entrepreneur, Dr. Khairul, also to learn from his experience as well. PD from Bhutan, how important is the role of women in business, and how do you overcome the challenges of being a woman in the science entrepreneurship world?
I take it
This is for you.
was addressed to me. It's interesting. I don't think that my gender has very much to do with me being a scientist or an entrepreneur or an executive. I never run my companies as a woman. I run my companies and my gender happens to be female. I haven't had really any issues. I'm not sure. I know what you're asking, but I have not come across that. I think that science talks, and that other thing walks, and as long as you're good at what you do, I don't think that gender has that much to do with it. At least not in the countries that I've dealt with, and I've sold equipment to 4 continents, and I've dealt with many different cultures, and I've never had any real issues.
Thank you very much. The high-tech park in Azerbaijan. Hi, Alper Selen, our partner there. What kind of actions can be taken if the developed product doesn't have a market in the country, and what would be the best option to market the product internationally?
Oh, that's an interesting one. The initial product should really be developed towards a market that's ideally as close to home as possible. It's always possible to launch internationally, but I would strongly suggest you focus on by whatever means on your home market, simply because it's easy to walk out the door and start talking to potential customers when you live right there. Internationally, expansion, that's trickier, so I would suggest, can you change the product? Can you maybe tweak a product or develop something new for your own home market?
We have an example, though, an interesting thing from one of our entrepreneurs in Malaysia that actually did not get too much market traction locally. But he attended the trade fair internationally through the support of the government. And at that trade fair, he met with customers from Malaysia that he signed up internationally. So it's interesting also how participating in some of these trade fairs could bring you external validation, added credibility, even for your own internal market. I never thought about that. It was an interesting example. Nafisa Iqbal from at Startup Dhaka. What is the proper way to do market analysis for a specific service or product?
Couple of different ways. I don't think there is any one good solution. I actually don't think you can get perfect data, but in this particular case, perfect is the enemy of good, and you just got to have good enough market data to give you the directionality in which you want to move. And there's 2 general ways of doing it, trying to look at it from the macro level, meaning top down, and identifying what the overall conditions are for the market and for your product, or bottom up, which means talking to the specific customers that you may target and then multiplying that by the number of customers that you think may exist in your country or market.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Koeris. Another online question: most new scientific applications have a very niche market, often within a specific industry. How do you recommend our entrepreneurs to make contacts and build relationships in a very narrow market? Dr. Becker.
Well, I think going to the trade shows and conferences in that industry, you have a business card, you start to hand it out, you give talks, you try to get invited to talks, you try to have meetings and use your network and further your network. And it's a little bit like knocking on many doors and hearing many no's. But no, one day you'll hear a yes, and then you turn that yes into another yes and another yes. And one day these yeses will allow you to do something what you really want to do. Just keep trying. Start knocking on doors, ask for meetings, ask for what you want, and don't take no for an answer.
Great. Dilshad Tekin from Turkey. I'm a PhD candidate studying entrepreneurial market. Do you suggest any research subject area for the academicians which will be useful for their enterprises?
Not quite sure how to take that, but at least on the entrepreneurial marketing side, it's really key to understand how your customers, scientists and engineers, fundamentally think about their products. We love the science, we love the engineering, we love the products, and we build awesome products. However, we build them for engineers, usually ourselves, or for scientists. And I've learned that actually you got to build them for your customers. And Apple is a very famous example of being rigorously customer focused. Like, what does the customer actually want and need, and building a product from the way back then. So focusing on teaching that particular kind of process and marketing to that particular effect could be useful.
Yes, if I can just add to that, it's as a scientist, as an entrepreneur, I might be very excited about the tools that I build and the sizing of the tools and how great the technology is and what happens on the scientific level. No, it's what value add does it provide the customer. The customer is king. The customer is what, pays your paycheck at the end of the day and provides the jobs through your company. So market to the customer from a perspective that they will buy and want to buy.
Great. I'm going to give you a quote right now. Scott Lockledge, the CEO co-founder of TipTech and a PhD in organic chemistry, said, inventing and innovating is fun, and the opportunity to do so in a large company setting is increasingly rare. In contrast, science-based startup businesses are predicated on radical innovation. Would you agree with that statement, and why?
I do agree with it. I think it's become extremely rare. I think the reason it's become very rare is research is very expensive. I mean, I was trained as a scientist, and I was promised jobs at Bell Labs and 3M and Kodak and Polaroid and DuPont, and the list goes on, and some of these companies don't even exist anymore. And when I graduated with a PhD, I realized that they wanted me just to be a technician. And this research is being pushed back onto the universities. But there needs to be research done with a different mindset. There's a different mindset between for-profit and for academia. So yes, you can do it in startups, but in startups mainly you're also limited. It is fun, but you're always limited with resources, and it's usually money, because it's very expensive to do basic research. So in all of my companies, I focus on small r, big D, but I do spend money on research in order to fund tomorrow's innovation.
And R is the research, and D the development for our audience. No worries. And in your experience, Michael, would you agree with the statement or disagree?
I've never worked at a large company, so I can't exactly say how it looks from the inside, but from interacting with large companies, I do feel similarly. They have had a tough time justifying the capital expenditure and the continuous expense to fund this early stage research, which may not actually translate into products. It may have wonderful applications one way or in a completely different way, but large companies have a very specific track. They're like large tankers, oil tankers. They just move slowly in one direction. They can't turn quickly. So they can't capitalize on the interesting outcomes of research, and that's what research is. You don't actually know what's going to come out of it, but most likely it's going to be cool. In a startup, you actually have the ability, because you're a small motorboat, you can actually move left, you can move right. You shouldn't zigzag. Eventually you need to focus on one particular course, but you have the ability to react to data and interesting innovations and opportunities much quicker. And I think that's why startups are a good vehicle to continue to do early stage research, which then may be commercialized much further by a larger established company.
To build on that, actually I had a conversation a while ago at the forum in Saudi Arabia with someone from DuPont who actually explained me that even if they produce a lot of innovations and have a lot of IP, the big corporations, they will not go after a certain opportunity unless it has a very big size that will make a big impact on their annual revenue. So there is, even now there are a lot of patents that are sitting with the big corporations that are not actually brought to market because the size of the opportunity is not that big. But we are talking about less than 1-2 billion, which actually could be a big opportunity for some of our entrepreneurs, of course, with the right support on the IP, so on and so forth. So for the people that actually have an entrepreneurial drive, they could even go and see what sort of opportunities there are within the university IP portfolio, talk with the technology transfer offices and also with the big corporation, and see what sort of applicability you could have for your local markets. Because also, if there's a certain market that was underestimated, you can be a target for an acquisition by these big corporations if you make a strong point. So let's get another question. Early stage capital needs for scientific startups are typically much higher than other types of startups in the IT space, for example. How did you address this challenge, and what resources would you suggest to our other entrepreneurs in our network? Michael?
Thank you. It is expensive to run a biomedical lab, at least in Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts. So the options are more limited than not. I would have loved to bootstrap my company like Jill did, because it is certainly more beneficial to the entrepreneur and to all the employees of the company, but I couldn't because I needed several $1 million to even get off the ground and do the initial validation of this particular product. So for a biomedical startup, a biotechnology startup, yeah, it's going to be expensive, and you have to find probably 7 figures, 8 figures of capital somewhere from either potential strategic partners, your government, or investors.
Do you want to develop a little bit on the differences between the different types of sources of capital between corporate investors? You do have in your investor portfolio corporate investors, but you also have typical venture funds. You see what sort of differences there in terms of approaches to investing?
Mm-hmm. I think there's one main difference. If we look at the corporate investors, let's call them the strategic investors. Chevron, the oil company, is one of our investors. They care about investing into a startup for the purpose of the startup developing a product that's useful to them. So they want to make some money, sure, but they actually want to increase the chances of a useful product getting to the market and they actually being the consumer of that product. So they're developing products for themselves, ideally. Venture investors or other institutional investors care mostly about making a return, meaning money, and they care that this company that they have funded either gets acquired for a lot of money, goes public at the stock market, or generates a very large revenue stream that is useful to them. So the intentions of why you invest are different, and the desired outcomes are very different. And if you have both in your company, you got to be cognizant of the fact that sometimes they align in what they want and what they want you to do, and sometimes they disagree.
Wonderful. At GEP Indonesia, our partner in Indonesia, just sent us a picture from Twitter. Thank you for joining us and welcome to TechConnect. Very nice picture. Christopher in Zimbabwe asks, I would like to know how to turn strategy into measurable action points. Any general advice, Dr. Becker?
Well, strategy usually goes into the overarching mission of your startup or your company, whatever it might be. And that strategy helps to achieve that mission, and you have to set the goals. I mean, you need to decide what goals you're trying to achieve with that strategy, which feed the overarching mission, whatever they might be. Bottom line growth, top line growth, number of units sold. If it's really early stage, months to a first prototype, a working prototype, your first few hires, your first funding, regardless where it comes from. Those are goals, and you must have a strategy to set those goals. But I think the way it works for me always is I have an idea, I have a mission, and the mission is large enough that as the entity grows and changes, new goals can be set to meet the mission goals or the overarching mission, and then I come up with a strategy to attain the goals.
Great. We have the next question from Twitter. Sigai Dorji from Bhutan asks, what are some of the essentials to build a vibrant ecosystem for entrepreneurship?
I think you gotta have three things. Again, you gotta have the people. That's the most important part. It's always about people, 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 people. Then you gotta have a support network, universities, friends, families, willing investors particularly, and also you have to have a third thing, which is an exit market, meaning you got to be able to either sell your company or actually go into the stock market or be capable of existing and generating a larger revenue stream, and then recycle back. Because in Boston and Cambridge, what's been wonderful is that people have started a company once, they were successful, like Jill, and then they started another company. And in doing so, having started this first company, they had several people that helped them who learned, and then they may actually also go and start another company or work again with Jill. So it actually spreads from there. So you've got to have a nucleus, and then you've got to nurture that nucleus such that it grows.
Wonderful. And also I want to encourage our entrepreneurs to connect with our local partners as well as with programs such as GIST, because we have a lot of resources like competitions and local boot camps and events like TechConnect that actually bring experts like Dr. Koeris and Dr. Becker to actually provide answers and support for your questions and to help you with your venture development. The next question is from Kwaku Ulrich Silver Coffee from Côte d'Ivoire. He asks, how can governments in developing countries encourage and help scientists in making discovery and also bringing them to the marketplace? The role of governments.
Well, I think a lot of governments can approach places that have great hubs for research or startups. You had mentioned MIT had a collaboration with Russia. I know many universities have collaborations with many different countries. Check with your government. See if you can plant a seed, an idea with them, that they have these great ideas. It doesn't have to be just the United States of America. Maybe some other countries in Europe you'd love to collaborate with. Then those two governments will put up a little bit of money that these scientists can travel, that they can share each other's research, that they can talk to each other. It's all about this communication. Or perhaps if your government is not quite there yet, let's say you're an organic chemist and you're working at developing a better polymer, and you know that somebody in France is also working on that. You can reach out to that professor and see if the two universities would be willing to fund sort of an exchange of ideas, a meet and greet, so you guys can talk. And then you planted this idea with your government, and the government looks, oh, there might be something here, a collaboration that could just further this idea of bringing a lab idea to a market.
If I can just expand briefly on that, the other big thing is money. The government can and should provide money. In the US, there is a particular program that is called the Small Business Innovation and Research Program, which specifically funds early ideas that do not have been commercialized yet, but gives them a decent amount of capital to commercialize them. Now, there are strings attached, and you have to meet certain criteria, and you should absolutely do it that way as well. But Specifically, most large governments have the opportunity and could provide small levels of funding or medium-sized levels of funding to interesting scientific ideas in order to provide the necessary startup cash to then leverage that into even more investment and keep going forward that way.
Thank you very much. I want to add also that our organization, CRDF Global, for example, we partner with the US government to build the GIST initiative, but we also partner with other foreign governments in actually setting up organizations like local national science foundations or tech commercialization programs with specific universities. So feel free to visit crdfglobal.org and connect with us because we also connect with partners and design together programs that work locally with local governments and specific key players to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem and a support system for both the scientists and the entrepreneurs to bring their ideas to market. Moving to the next question, Taha in Pakistan asks via Twitter, what should one do if the project is big but the money is not, but good for your work portfolio and business experience?
There's never enough money, ever. You just have to figure it out. And a lot of times when I have a really big problem, what I try to do is break it into smaller problems that I can manage. And that also then gives you the milestones of attaining that big project. Maybe you can get funding for each one of the little ones along the way and then add them back up at the end.
Great.
Good luck.
We have the next question from Kwaku Ulrich Silveri Coffee from Cote d'Ivoire. What do you, Dr. Jill and Dr. Michael, do to help scientists from the developing countries like mine?
So what I've been doing in the past is I have been working with Ovidiu and CRDF, not so much on the science side just yet, but we were actually looking at a lot of the different business plans and opportunities from all around the world. And I actually would very much look forward to seeing more scientific ideas be a part of the CRDF business plan, the global business plan contest.
Great. But you also have, you started a network to support biomedical engineers, right? If you can say a few words about that, because I think it would be good to provide those resources to a global community of practitioners and scientists. If you can say a few words, maybe the website.
That's a very good point. So what I did on the side was to start a website called biotechstart.org, and the intention is to provide information specifically to scientists and engineers on what are best practices in starting a new biotech, focused mostly in North America, but hopefully some of the learnings that we have made in recent years by ourselves as well as others that contribute to the site can be applied to other innovative products and other innovative technologies around the world.
What is the website?
biotechstart.org.
Thank you very much. I think we will provide the link on our website too. Dr. Becker?
So I mentor a lot. I mentor small companies, I mentor entrepreneurs, I mentor people. The number one thing I'm interested in is for the creation of jobs. And part of that, I also have a vested interest to further the ecosystem where I live and breathe and myself work. So this might take a path that I mentor through the great universities there, or I mentor and help certain companies, and this is usually through their embassies, bring companies over either for a 48 hours in the hub for a pitch, or that they come over and get incubated for 3 to 4 months in this great ecosystem. Boston area is medical mecca, and if you have, I mean, my company should have been started on the other coast, but that's another matter. But it's, for me...
You mean in Europe? No.
Semiconductor area, you have to be in California. It's just how it goes.
Yeah.
But it's, for me, it's less about looking at which developing countries. It's more about, I think science and technology is its own culture, its own country, and I don't see boundaries. I'm just interested in people succeeding, in companies growing, and real products being made and taken off. And at the end of the day, the creation of jobs. That's the only thing I'm interested in. I've not cut it up into country specific.
Another interesting resource, the Royal Society of UK did a paper on the scientific networks, where basically they were looking at mapping the various global scientific networks, and that's one resource, and that's another resource that's actually looking at how the various diaspora communities connect back with their countries for the purpose of exchanging knowledge and ideas on scientific breakthroughs. And also I want to encourage our entrepreneurs and scientists to join the GIST network. We have a network, a global network, about 240,000 people across the globe. That's also a wonderful opportunity to exchange ideas and connect with other like-minded professionals. GP Indonesia wants to know what's the best way to develop an innovative product fitted to our targeted market. Do we innovate first or do we survey our market first?
I think if you're thinking about innovation, you're doing it. So it's hard to stop thinking about a cool product when you're a scientist or engineer. You're by nature going to be building it, doing it, even in your mind, and then you want to probably really quickly follow and understand what the market looks like for that. Now, if you are not working on anything, you may identify a market first, and this comes back to the earlier question: what comes first, the science or the business? And I agree with Jill, they are really very intertwined. But sometimes it depends on your own personal likes of what you think about first. For me as an engineer and scientist, I'm probably going to be thinking about the product first and then the market.
Great. Our viewing groups in Turkey as well as Ciputra University in Indonesia just sent us pictures via Twitter. So here it is with our global audience. Please continue to send us pictures and questions. Thank you for joining us today, our Turkey site and also the Ciputra University. DK Bujel asks, one of the hurdles for potential entrepreneurs is the availability of funds and investment. Back to the funding question. Where do we find potential investors globally and easily? And to add a little bit there, maybe we talk a little bit about the crowdfunding availability for entrepreneurs from other markets. If you can share some insights on the availability of global funding as well. You have some ideas, Dr. Becker?
I've seen some people do cool things on Kickstarter, believe it or not. And for me, that's like crowdfunding. The concept of getting investors easily, it's not easy. Money is tough to come by, I think, for everyone. And when they're willing to validate your idea, your product, your business in order to give you money, that's fantastic. But it also comes with strings attached. And you have a fiduciary responsibility to own up to whatever those strings were that you accepted the money for. I would focus more in the passion of creating the product that you believe will help in whatever way add value. Less focused about studies and other things like that. If it's a good idea, the money will come. Still not that easily, but easier than if you're trying to make a better chalkboard. But there's value everywhere. I mean, there's an entire company that dedicated itself to making paint that all the walls become chalkboard-like, and the tabletops that you can write on absolutely everything. So there's innovation everywhere.
And we have an example of one entrepreneur we brought on TechConnect from Egypt that raised 80,000 on Kickstarter, and also one of our entrepreneurs from Lebanon, Hind Hobeika, who raised about 80,000 as well on a crowdfunding platform. Kencho from, and also I want to encourage our entrepreneurs to check our raising capital for your venture TechConnect. Check the GIST Initiative website, because we have a specific TechConnect dedicating on how you raise capital for your venture. That goes in more depth about raising capital. Kencho from Bhutan asks, I'm studying social entrepreneurship. What do you have to say about the sustainability and market of S&T based social ventures today?
Science and technology, I think, is not limited to one type of venture or another. It's all permeating, I think, the entire venture creation industry. If you start a startup based on some particular science or technology, I think it really matters what you want to achieve. Do you want to build maximum value for your customers, for yourself, for your employees, or do you want to trade off some of that and essentially say, look, I'm happy by actually just providing a very cool product at a reasonable price to actually alleviate some suffering in the world, provide malaria medicines or something like that. And I think all of this exists harmoniously next to each other, and what you've got to do is you've got to align everyone that is associated with your company with that mission. It's really very mission-centric. So your investors have to be aligned, they have to be okay with it. Your employees have to be okay with it. You have to be okay with it. Your scientists and scientific co-founders have to be okay with it. As long as that's the case, you can do pretty much anything you want.
Wonderful. Startup Grind Jakarta, very strong participation from Indonesia. Salam Inovasi just sent in a picture via Twitter. Hello and thank you very much for joining a part of the program today. Before closing, please be on the lookout and follow GIST in the next few months as we are about to launch new programs at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in Morocco that will provide new resources for entrepreneurs in emerging markets. Join us on the GIST network on Facebook. I'm afraid we are out of time. We got a lot of questions. Thank you so much to our panelists, Dr. Jill Becker and Dr. Michael Koeris, for joining us today. Special thanks to the GIST TechConnect viewing sites around the world, around the globe, for mobilizing their entrepreneurial communities. Thanks to our colleague at CRDF, Fidan Karimova, and at State Department, Dr. Alona Baki, and of course our colleagues at IIP here for a wonderful production of the program. We encourage you to continue to learn about the topics we discussed today. We posted a list of specific resources on the page which includes educational videos, courses, as well as a number of articles for you to review at your convenience. They should aid you in bringing your own innovations to market. I want to encourage you to see the prior Tech Connects as well. Good luck, and one of the best ways to continue to learn about this and other entrepreneurship topics is to stay informed about the GIST initiative programs. Don't forget to vote for the Tech Eye competition until October 1st to join in our upcoming Green GIST Bootcamp in Morocco from September 30 to October 1st. To close, I would like to emphasize that today's program is just the starting point on your journey. We at GIST know that you can do it. It's about creating new opportunities for your venture and specifically acting on it. We hope you can join us for our next Tech Connect in early November. Thank you again for joining. Take care and keep in touch. And thank you, our speakers.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the GIST TechConnect series, a webcast of the U.S. Department of State's Global Innovation Through Science and Technology Initiative, or GIST. I am Dr. Frances Colon, and I am the Acting Science and Technology Advisor for the Secretary of State, John Kerry. This Tech Connect highlights science entrepreneurs who took their scientific inventions into the business market. As a scientist and a policymaker, this topic is especially close to my heart, and I understand the vast gap between the academic world and the business realm. Programs such as GIST Webcast help bridge that very gap. Entrepreneurship that is based on science and technology, or in short, S&T, leads to new products and companies that fuel economic growth, create jobs, and address important challenges in agriculture, energy, healthcare, and other sectors. My office and the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs are working to elevate the importance of S&T in the State Department's promotion of global prosperity. Creating an economy that is driven by S&T innovation depends on having a strong education system, advancement of women and minorities in the scientific and entrepreneurial realm, and policies that support these goals. My office is promoting the integration of these topics in foreign policy dialogues and activities throughout the State Department. The GIST community extends globally and includes over 240,000 entrepreneurs. I've seen GIST change lives. For example, GIST innovators invented a water filter to aid rural Pakistani communities. This filter can now be deployed to prevent waterborne diseases worldwide. Finally, I want to thank our Tech Connect panel of experts for joining us to share their experiences and answer your questions. I encourage you to stay active as a part of the GIST community. Innovative entrepreneurs like you are the catalyst for solving challenges, both local and global. And I am honored to support your creativity and persistence. Thank you.